He is one of Richmond's favorite writers and has an unprecedented knowledge of the city's history. Harry Kollatz Jr. has been enlightening the readers of Richmond Magazine for more than 3 decades and has seen Central Virginia change so much in that time. Today, we dive deep into the origin, present, and future of the River City. Well, welcome to Untold, and today I am interviewing a fellow journalist, which is always exciting. Somebody else who does some similar work, but different. This gentleman, Harry Kollatz, is Richmond's resident historian, been a journalist at Richmond Magazine for, we just did the math. We didn't do the math. My producer did the math. 32 years?
32 years, I think.
Yeah. And
I don't do math in front of the clubhouse. So.
I don't do math at all.
I'm an enumerate.
I can do tax and tip, and that's where it stops.
You're better than me.
Well, Harry, first off, my question is, how does one become sort of a known historian of a place? I mean, you certainly are that. You've been interviewed by so many different outlets for historical context. You're consulted on projects that involved, historical buildings and properties. I mean, you are known as that. But how does one become sort of a resident historian?
Well, resident historian helps that you're from here, which I am.
Yeah.
And, I think it all goes back to being brought up in an Edsel farm. My dad collected the cars, and I would poke around in them and come up with, grotty pieces of change and my first Broadway playbills and all sorts of random objects, poking around in those cars. And then being in Chesterfield County, which is where I grew up, and coming into Richmond, which was always something of something very exciting. At the time it was Powhite. Excuse me, guys. Everybody pronounces it different. It's all a miscorruption. So it was practically pre-Chippenham, so it was the long way. And it was always something of an excitement. And we would come up 14th Street, and there was this big commercial advertising sign for the Phillips Lewis Company, which is long ago past, but it was a huge wall-size painting. And I wrote about this in a recent issue of the magazine about ghost signs. And there's this series of steps, and there was a woman at a spinning wheel, and I just thought she was spinning or creating the wharf and the woof of our history, even at my young age. I was an odd kid who grew up into an even odder adult. But so I felt that I've always just felt a pull, and
you've
so
always liked history. You've always been
always
into
have,
it.
yeah.
And when you find something
genetically
vintage,
predisposed,
you
for
sort of want to know where it came from and how.
Well, everything comes from somewhere, and that's what I enjoy doing. Is as far as I can, delving into the origin story of people and places. And while we're at that, one of the great influences on me, we recently lost Ed Slippick Jr., who was an astounding chronicler of Richmond and how it got that way, and why it looks this way. He was an architectural historian and just an immense influence on people in the preservation community. And he wrote for Style Weekly for 30 years as an architectural critic. He also did arts criticism and cultural observations. And between us, we covered either ends of the waterfront. In a way, I was trying to catch up to him, but he had been in business. He had been writing a long time before I came along.
He had more history than you did.
Yeah, he had more history than I did. But we're very sad. We're bereft at his departure. But what we have is his legacy of his writing, and so that's all you can hope for.
And
really.
his influence.
And his influence.
You're doing the work that he
left. And I often quoted him, because he had plenty to choose from. But he, like me, much of his writing is pre-internet, right? So you have to go and track it down in archives sometimes, which is what I do. I started writing, for the magazine before there was even a hint of social media, and so some of my work has been collected, but most of it is just out there.
Are you a social media guy?
Well, I sort of, yes.
You adapt it. You use it.
I use it. It's a tool. I also, I use it for,
promoting your
pieces. As well as asking questions because it's one of the biggest, megaphones you can have.
Right.
And so I've used it. I do use it.
Well, let me ask you this. If you had to, in summary, I mean, the story of Richmond, as you said, because you've lived it and you've seen it change so much from when you started paying attention to it as a small boy to now. Mm-hmm. What is the story of this city in sort of a succinct way? It's a city that was what is what. How is it that you would write the story of Richmond?
100 words or less.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
in a tweet.
It began as a crossroads for commercialism, and that included, everything from, unfortunately, slaves to animal hides, and we have the William Byrd's family to thank for that. Byrd II, who allegedly stood on the brow of what's now Libby Hill and looked down and saw the curve, that's sinuous curve of the James, and said it looked and it does look extremely reminiscent of a similar bend in the Thames by Richmond, England, which is sort of a town, a suburb, if there really were any, outside of London. And so he basically to be the commander of the trade at the fall line and to strong-arm competition, and at the behest of the colonial legislature, founded a town, which was Richmond. And then there was Rocky Ridge, which evolved and became Manchester across the river. So we've always been a center of commerce. And eventually the cultural aspect came around, where the place where Edgar Allan Poe spent half of his 40 years, an aggregate of half of his 40 years. The first electric streetcar system in the world was devised here during 1888 by an Annapolis-trained Connecticut Yankee by the name of Frank Julian Sprague. And he came down here with nothing much more than gumption and an idea, and he and Team Sprague overcame typhoid and the competition of horse cart pullers, who were very suspect of this whole electricity thing. J. Thompson Brown, who was a developer here, recognized that the ridges and ravines were the ancient impediments to growing the city. This is far more than 100 words, but I was just talking about growth.
Right.
And another aspect of the city, which I have recently written about, is the James River and Kanawha Canal, which many people in Richmond, particularly if they're new from here, they pass over it on the Boulevard Bridge or the Huguenot Bridge, and they think it's a drainage ditch, which it sort of resembles now, but it was a dynamic, vital conduit of commerce and industry throughout the 18th and into the late, past the Civil War, 1880s Richmond, and serving Central Virginia, much like WTVR.
First station in the South.
The South's first television station. I love that Conestoga wagon as a kid. I remember when the TVs used to sign off and the Indian head would come up, and anyway, then the jets flew over. So the Blue Angels. Anyway, so but that's part of the story too, because here we're sitting in a very early adapter to this newfangled television, and we were on the forefront of that. And so, we've had innovations and devices created here, including the pop top for your aluminum cans. Reynolds Metals came up with that. Engineers for Reynolds Metals. And so, but also, we have, Adele Clark, who in the late 19th, early 20th century with Nora Houston created essentially a climate to appreciate contemporary art. And this is in the early 1900s, pre-World War I. And they had studied in New York, and they taught Teresa Pollock, who ended up ultimately hired by Mr. Hibbs to start what's now the VCU School of the Arts. And also the University of Richmond's art program. And so this is important because it really creates this cultural environment that grows and makes us a much more livable place, an aesthetic place, a place that appreciates aesthetics. So that's an important component of who we are. And so then, of course, in the 1950s, 60s, you get the highways that come through. because they get rid of the streetcars after 61 years. They line them up in this lugubrious parade, take them down to Fulton, and burn them for scrap. And the only place you can actually see a Richmond trolley is at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. It's like sort of sad. It's like a dinosaur, the assembled bones of a dinosaur. And so the culture that has been created here by Virginia Union University, Virginia Commonwealth University, and University of Richmond provide us with youth and ideas and people who become attracted to Richmond and want to live here. And so, and if they can afford it now, they settle in the city or nearby. And that adds to us, that they become part of the story. And they become part of the woven mixture of us.
We were talking beforehand about sort of this cultural sort of, magnetism of people that get here and then don't wish to leave. That it like kind of draws you in, and then you think, oh, this is going to be a temporary stop on the way, and the next thing you know, 20 years have gone by and it's home. Do you see that pattern?
Oh yeah,
again and again. Why is that? What is it about Richmond that allows?
Also, people leave and come back. Yeah. That's the other thing.
The draw, right? Yeah, right. Yeah. You can leave. And
they
come
go
back.
out into the world and they achieve what they're going to do. Perhaps, and then they come home because it's what they know. It's comfortable. It's where they live, where they came up, where they have friends.
Why is it comfortable?
Why is it comfortable? Well, I think it's easy to get around, fairly easy compared to other places. And I think the antique buildings that we have here, unfortunately, we're losing a number of them. But certain neighborhoods, the Fan, the Museum District, Ginter Park, Highland Park, places like that, give us a kind of it's human scale, right? Unlike the high-rise buildings we have with people crammed in them, it's built on a human level, and you can appreciate. And so much of Richmond was built before the automobile, or grew as a result of streetcars, which traveled at a breakneck speed at 20 miles an hour. So Richmond is a place to appreciate, to observe. And I walked to work for 20 years, zigzagging through the alley of the Fan to where we had in the bookbindery, which itself was Luther Jenkins' bookbindery, where he made books, and it's been renovated and turned into offices. And I would walk there, and I always saw something different, depending on the weather, the season, and just the elements of the architecture, and what people do with their yards, their backyards, and how what they plant in the front yard or whatever, and so I think that really attracts people. The fact that there's individualism here. There's a sense of personhood, of
character,
agency, of character.
In each
exactly.
neighborhood. Yeah,
there's an aesthetic to the place.
I certainly, when I have people visit, they always say, "Gosh, it's like you have 10 cities within a city."
Right,
because if you go to Church Hill, you kind of have a vibe of the city, and then that's very different from like Carricktown, where you live, or from the Fan. Like they all kind of have their own sort of visible identity, and I
absolutely.
think,
and we're neighborhood proud in Richmond,
and it's not all tall, towering,
right? Not
modern,
all of it, not yet.
Right? Not yet. There's certainly a lot. I mean, Scott's Edition would be,
right. Well, and I knew Scott. I got to acquainted with Scott's Edition back again a long time ago, in the late '80s, when I was writing for a publication, which I should mention, the Richmond Review, which is little remembered and lamented by me, but that was my postgraduate internship writing gig. I wasn't paid, but it's where I cut my eye teeth on feature writing and history writing. And Jim Armstrong, whom I'm going to send this podcast to, ran that publication basically on his credit card. And it had a life of about 2.5 years. And so, but it was in Scott's Edition. It was in the Polk building. That was where the Polk City Directory was. And I had a summer job as an enumerator. This is before the review even started. I was sent out into the into the wilds to knock on people's doors and ask them their name and what they did for a living, and which was quite an interesting, quite a fascinating tour of South Richmond at times. And then when I became acquainted with the Scots Addition, it was a fairly quiet place. Because
industrial mostly, right?
It was industrial, warehouses and so forth.
Yeah.
There were 2 ice cream factories in Scots Addition at the time, among other things, a lot of light industry. And so, and then there were a few residences, and I would watch people on their front porches, like gazing out. It was like, WPA, Depression era photography. And so I became acquainted with it in that way. And when I was doing repertory comedy back a long time ago, the late Barry Fitzgerald had his photography studio there, and then I became acquainted with Scots Addition that way. So I have this, I knew
you
it.
have
before.
A relationship. Probably
I have a
with
relationship.
All these places.
I knew it before it was what it is, and I miss it a bit.
Well, I think you must look around there and hardly recognize. It's such a wild transformation.
Not that long ago, I was in my rare forays in an automobile. I was down on Gray Street near VCU, and I took a turn, I guess, on Harrison Street. And for a moment, I thought I was having a moment. I was having some sort of spasm or attack, because I didn't know where I was.
Yeah. And you're the resident historian.
I know.
What
happened?
Lost. Well, that's an interesting point to take a break. I think we got a very good look back. I want to look current when we come back after the break, talking about current things Richmond is experiencing and some of your thoughts on those items. We will be right back. If you're enjoying Untold, like and subscribe on YouTube. You can also rate and follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. So I have to ask this because right when we decided to interview you, my first thought was, I wonder what he thinks about Monument Avenue. I wonder what he. I know that's a charge, but I am an investigative reporter at the core, indeed. So I can't help it. I'm like, that was the first thing that came to mind. I was like, as a historian, someone who's tied to Richmond, and that, how do you sit with that? What are your thoughts?
Well, I had about 3 trains of thought pertaining to the whole Monument Avenue question at any given time. As a historian, preservationist, we would have these periodic spasms of let's tear them down or let them rot or let's stop the funding so they can rust. So
when they actually came down, wasn't the first time this had sparked?
It wasn't the first time this came up at all, but when the tide of history sweeps through your town, there's really only 2 alternatives. You either swim or find a boat, something to cling to, because what's going to happen, you can't stop it. You can't. The waters are going to roll over you. I was sort of a context guy. I thought, well, signs, QR codes, but they're in the middle of the road, and who's going to do that? And also, I thought about the artists. The most interesting statue on Monument Avenue was the Matthew Fontaine Maury. Maury has what I would call, boy, we're going to get letters on this, the Werner von Braun problem, because he was a dedicated man of science, but on the other hand, he also devised what they called a electric torpedo, which was basically something that would sit in the water, and when a ship would hit it, it would blow up. And that happened. And then he, after the war, he wanted to set up a rump confederacy in Mexico, and thankfully, then Emperor Maximilian got himself shot during the Revolution. So that ended that, and he went to England, and then God forgive, and he came back. But anyway, so what I thought was a metaphor for this whole thing was that his globe had this big globe behind him.
Right.
A friend of mine, as a young woman, thought that was his brain. And then these people, this twisted group of people who were pulling themselves out of a surf presumably after a shipwreck, and there were men and women, and there was a little dog and children and a steer, and when you took it off the plinth and set it down on the road, it really had this aspect of the struggle. What are we going to do now? We're struggling out of the surf to get to an uncertain beach, and what's next? And I think that's where we are. Because the statues are gone.
Are you sad to see when you drive down Monument? I just wonder, you're someone who appreciates, like you said, the context. I'm not saying that in any way you're supportive of the viewpoints of the people represented. I know that. I think most common decent people are not. But what I wonder is from a historical perspective, like how, I don't know, significant those structures were.
I wouldn't describe myself as sad. I mean, I think that it was that those statues represented they weren't put up right after the war. It was in the late 19th, early 20th century that and Maury was the last in 1929. So they reflect attitudes of the time more than they do. Because the people that were part of the war were very old and gone by then, and many of them. And so what I felt was, I think one way to tell this is Stonewall Jackson, of course, sat there at Boulevard, what's now Arthur Ashe Boulevard, and Monument, and you would have to curve around him. And then for months afterwards, just out of habit, if I was driving down there, I would turn the wheel a little bit, wait a minute, I have to do that.
Yeah.
Because he's gone. And so I think that eventually there will be people who did not know there were statues there or memorials. And we've got to figure out what's going to happen next. And Richmond being Richmond and the situation being what it is, I think it's going to be quite a while before anything, if anything, goes up or not replaces them, but somebody comes up with something that's going to satisfy enough people. Public art in the current climate is nearly impossible.
Divisive.
It's divisive because no one can agree. And then you put somebody up, and it turns out they have
something in their
past that we didn't know at the time or got glossed over.
But do we have any responsibility, from a historian's perspective, to preserve what were the opinions of that time represented in art or sculpture? In your mind, was there an appropriate way to manage that, and is that what we did?
Well, we have a statue of Caligula in the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, and so, of course, that's an extreme example. That was several thousand years ago, and he was not a particularly swell fella. And the opinions. Well, here's the thing: being something of a historian, it's a bit short-sighted of us to try to apply our thinking and our more advanced ideas to someone who couldn't possibly know us. They may speak like us, they sort of like us, they may even look like us, but they're not us. The past is a foreign country. And you have to approach that space gingerly and with knowledge that their knowledge of the world was not necessarily informed by what we believe. And the ones who were sort of were out front, then we know them because they were not with the rest of the herd, and so. But they're individuals. Those are not the way. They're not commonplace. That is what I'm talking about when I talk about history and the stories. This is complicated, and we don't always know what was going. You don't know necessarily what's going on in people's heads or their hearts, for that matter.
Past is a foreign country. I really like that. I'm going to use that line. I'll quote you.
I'll
give you credit.
I don't think I came up with it, but to say that I did.
Yeah. Okay.
It makes me look good.
I think so.
It makes me sound like I know what I'm talking about.
So that's an interesting take. I also wanted to ask you, as you've lived through many governors and many city leaders and many influential people in politics, in your mind, is there one elected person that had the most dramatic or transformational impact on Richmond? Is it a mayor? Is it a governor? Is it a civic leader? Is there someone that you lived through that after their term you said, wow, this Richmond is forever changed. It's a different place after this person.
Well, I mean, Doug Wilder being the first African-American mayor or governor of the state, that was certainly a watershed moment. Mm-hmm. We can go back and forth on what he was like as a governor and later as a mayor, but that was certainly a watershed moment. Mm-hmm. I think that
he did big things. I mean, he was like a big ideas guy. He wasn't.
Well, he was indeed.
We've had him on the show.
And Mary Sue Terry was his attorney general, and that was the first woman in that role. And here's the thing about the Richmond mayor situation is, we're on the 22nd year of the elected mayor. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, because everyone's got so fed up with the council manager form. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if we figured out this elected mayor thing yet, and what a strong mayor means.
What makes you say that?
Well, I don't want to. Our history of elected mayors up until this point has been one of complexities.
Tell me.
And controversies.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
Well, I mean, Wilder's mayor kicked the school board out of City Hall.
Right.
Cost the city $1 million. That didn't settle anything. And the mayors since then have been, they've had these grand plans. Every single one of them seems to like it. They want to build this or that, and these silver.
I agree with you.
These gold-plated, let's chase this.
And seldom do
shiny
they come
object.
to fruition.
Well, because the public doesn't want them usually. It's this top-down, you're going to have this, don't worry your pretty little head, it's going to turn out okay, that the public, I think, and rightly, gets their back up about, rather than...
Coliseum.
Well, the Coliseum is a curious case, It's
casino. I'm just racking off a few
the casino and old Navy Hill and all that. We can go down a really long list. And also, people who have of an awareness of things that have been sponsored by the city, like the 6th Street Festival Marketplace, which is now dimming on people's memories, but it was an attempt to bring a downtown mall project in the middle of town. So that didn't work out very well, and it survived kind of on one leg because the city subsidized it. And that's just one example. So people are leery of these kinds of projects, and as well as they should be, I think, because it's just something that the public should be involved with, rather than being told. And there are certain cases where it looks like it's all a foregone conclusion that some of these public meetings that are held is just sort of window dressing for elements that are being put into play anyway. There's some aspects to the current.
You think there needs to be more democracy in the process?
Yeah, I do. I think, and I think the Richmond 300 project, they've had, and there are people who are objecting to this because, again, the residential towers going up everywhere. In particular in Broad Street, because it was one reason why the Pulse exists, the BRT, is that it changed the zoning so that more people could live there because they would have access to transit. Now, whether they actually use it or not, I don't know. It seems like every time I take it, it's pretty packed, particularly during the rush hour times. And I do use it, and that's I get so annoyed on the social media aspect of it when people say, "Why should I be paying to run a thing, something I never use?" It's like, because you don't use it, nobody else does.
Right.
And so it's it's been of benefit to me in any number of occasions, and will be again, I'm sure, because I don't like to drive particularly.
Well, frankly, in a mid-sized city, you need to come up with some solutions on transportation, and I think we've reached that, don't you? I mean,
absolutely.
You'd say Richmond is
there
mid-sized.
There are more people living in Richmond now than have lived here since about 1950, and it's taken us that long to get to this.
Wow.
Get to this point in the census.
Was that like because of an exodus to the counties?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay. That was the white flight aspect. Also, there were more Richmonders and less of Richmond. I will explain. In 1950 is before those highways cut through Richmond like the Y incision of an autopsy, and it was before a great deal of these destructions that were a part of quote unquote urban renewal. The complete demolition of Fulton. The destruction in Jackson Ward, And when the expressway went through Randolph and Oregon Hill and through downtown and destroyed several of the remaining locks of the James River and Kanawha Canal, and it was ridiculous.
Was that poor city planning? What was the...
Well, again, it was an attempt to, let's be like someplace else. And I think in terms of the expressway, and this is, again, this is my opinion from what I've learned or studied and how I've interpreted, but the management class wanted to get to their suburban homes or to their tea times at the club, not tea, but golfing. Yeah. And so they figured 15 minutes or less on the expressway would get them there. Of course, the expressway is clogged up with the toll booth, so it's not really an expressway. Right. When they were advocating, trying to promote the downtown expressway, these big newspaper ads, full-page ads were put in, celebrate, see the back lots of the city. It's like, why do you want to look at the back lots of the city?
Nobody wants to see the back lots.
Nobody wants to see the loading docks, the backstage, the backstage of the city.
I think that's kind of like, I don't know, a poorly thought out part of 95. Every time I go down 95, through Richmond, I think to myself, this is the most unattractive view of our city,
particularly coming from the south.
And considering the the volume of people that are just simply passing, right? You have to consider that they're going from DC to Norfolk, or they're going to the Outer Banks, or they're just passing by on 95.
Well, then they get to Main Street Station, and they're just like, what's that?
And they're like, there's like one beautiful thing at the end, but of all this other, you're just seeing.
How did that?
Like you're saying, the backside of you're like, didn't anyone think to make like something?
Well, it was about expediency.
I guess.
It was the thought of expediency and efficiency.
There's just so many more inviting visuals you could offer someone passing by. You know what I mean? And then scrap lots and industrial warehouses. And
well, that's the thing. Richmond for a while, we were trying to make this transition, but Richmond for a while has not been able to figure out what it wanted to be when it grew up in its post-industrial period.
Do you think it has now?
I think we're on our way.
Mm-hmm. In the right direction?
I hope so. I think we're heading in the right direction. I think Danny Avula, our current mayor, I think is one indication of that. I mean, he's not an ex-governor. He's not a former representative.
He hasn't offered any shiny projects.
He hasn't yet offered any shiny projects. Let's concentrate on what we have. I hope. I mean, that's my hope, that there are more people like that. I've been an advocate for a long time, and I'm not alone. This has been going on since the 60s. Of redeveloping the canal. If you go to Europe or Britain, the narrow boats, these motorized narrow boats, go up the canals, and they're just gorgeous. The views and so forth. And if you could somehow do that between Richmond and Lynchburg, you could take and
monetize it.
Monetize it.
Right.
And turn it into a cruise.
Right.
It's not a particularly exotic cruise, but for people who've never done it. It would be a great thing, but it takes will and money and cooperation, and I
think the cooperation part
the cooperation point is the operative. Yes,
it
really is, and also inspiration. Why would we want to do that? What's the opportunity cost? So forth and so on, and that's always an impediment.
The sticking point. Well, I think that present moment is a good one to hit a break, and when we come back, I want to talk about the future, looking forward to Richmond. We'll be right back.
In the year 2000.
If you're enjoying Untold, like and subscribe on YouTube. You can also rate and follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. So, Harry, I want to ask you about the waterfront. We were just talking about that. Has Richmond missed sort of a grand opportunity by not doing more to develop sort of the Rockets Landing, James River, the canal, all that area? I mean, most cities that have even the slightest bit of waterfront access, and I think of like San Antonio or like someplace that doesn't have a necessarily impressive coastal body of water to work with, but some water.
Right.
They almost always find a way to monetize that in a tourism sense, in a in just generally in restaurants, you want a view. I mean, all of the things. And I just, when I think about ways Richmond could next level,
right,
in my mind, I think, man, it would be so nice if we had a plethora of riverfront choices, options, not just like 2 restaurants, and a running path, but like more usable development.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, I would ask people to go see West by Water, an exhibition of John Henley's photographs. He was a masterful photographer, and I wrote the text, the historical components of that. And you can learn a little bit about the history of the James River and Kanawha Canal and its importance to the city, and perhaps how it could be again in the future under a different guise. One detail is that the Great Shiplock, as in Great Shiplock Park, which could receive ocean-going ships up until really the early 20th.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, 19th
was
century.
That deep?
Yeah, it was 100. Yeah, I mean, it was that deep. Now the ships eventually outgrew it, but
Yeah.
There were small craft that could come in there and did come into the early 1980s,
Mm-hmm.
and they repaired the lock. The city took time. There's a great photograph of this guy in this diving helmet. He's one of those round helmets, and he would go in there and he would fix the lock so it would keep opening. But we turned our back on that. It's an engineering issue. It's not rocket science. It's simply, how to figure out how to have the water rise and lower. It's also the commercial, the engineers, the federal engineers. Corps of Engineers. There's a Corps of Engineers issue.
Yeah.
But just by doing that, also, the big problem is if you go, even if the Great Shiplock locks worked, as soon as you go in there, there's the Norfolk and Southern Bridge that's been lowered and has not been able to. It's supposedly it's a basilisk bridge. It's supposed to come up and lower so ships can go through. Well, it's been locked in place, or the railroad has. In the 90s, there was discussion, this kind of tepid conversation between the city and Norfolk and Southern, and they do still run trains over it. I mean, it's not like it's not used, but it would be great if they could lift it and boats could come through there,
right?
Because it would really be a boon to that stretch. But we do have the Capitol Trail, which is great because it covers the history and the nature. All of that, it's great. But it's interesting to me if you stand at Great Shiplock and you look just several hundred yards over onto Rocket's Landing, and they have a marina there, and there's excitement about that.
So why don't we do it like times 10?
Well, again, it just takes will and cooperation and funding. And also, you talk about, this to me would be a better use than some other, gleaming, shining projects that's been advocated in the past. And we've tried, we've got, the Annabelle Lee used to, depart from there on a cruise that would go down the river and turn around and come back. People really liked it. And there was a cruise line that would run down the Intercoastal Waterway. They would come into Richmond, and I remember getting off. I was walking to Poe's Pub one late night, and the crew got off, come tumbling off the boat, and they asked me, I said, "Do you know where a good Irish pub is?" And I pointed them over to Chenet, and Dock Street was really dark and spooky looking in those days. There was no trail. And so they went merrily on their way, and I was like, "Man, this is what I should have done."
Yeah, right. This
is what I should have. This is what a missed opportunity.
Pub. Yeah. Well, I do feel like it's sort of, I don't know. I just wish it was a bigger component to the Richmond experience.
That to me is a natural resource.
Yeah.
I mean, there are things you would have to build to have these craft, the small craft, the pleasure craft come through. I'm not even a boater. I'm not someone who does that. But there are people who do.
I just want to eat out on the water.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
That's
I just
true,
want to sit out. I mean, I used to love going to Legend Brewing Company.
Oh,
and I mean,
absolutely,
and there was nothing spectacular about that deck. It was just nice to be
you saw
outside and you could see the water, and it was like,
But now they're getting a building in front of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's
to me, that should have been a park.
Right. It's or that green space, like usable.
That's just my opinion.
Why don't we have soccer fields for kids along the way? I mean, anything that just brings people into the water.
You know what they did in Paris, and I know everyone's, that's Paris, Harry. But in Paris, they closed their version of the expressway, the Pompidou Highway.
Oh yeah, they built a green space,
and they made it into a green space.
Yes, it is amazing.
And it's for there are no cars. You can take your bicycle down there. And then in the summer they bring in sand and make these beaches there.
It is amazing.
And it's like, and for a long time there were no restaurants on that side. There was nothing with a river view, as odd as that might be. And so now that has prompted the development of these small, eating places or places where you can seek refreshment and so forth. And of course, Paris is one of the most densely populated, most highly congested cities in Europe.
They need the space. They need the green space for sure.
Absolutely, and it was not done without controversy.
Yeah.
There was plenty of howling and complaining about.
I remember reading about it during the time
But
process.
now that it's there,
it's amazing.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
exactly.
It is.
Yeah.
I also, speaking of future shiny objects,
the ones in the sky you see on occasion.
I was going to bring up
remember that flap with the New Jersey happened late last year?
Oh yes, I remember that.
Yeah.
The squirrels, the stadium, the new Carmack Stadium.
Oh yeah,
which only took, how many years was that in conversation? Maybe
things take time.
I guess
planning takes time. If you rush into something, you could.
I don't
have problems later.
We had Parney on the show, and we talked about sort of the tediousness of that, and you and I talked about cooperation a minute ago, and just sort of how that was the critical element that could not be resolved. It was just it was like everybody had their own ideas, but now this is finally going to open in April, and it's it's really exciting for a lot of people.
Yeah.
What, in your mind, what's the significance of that team to Richmond? Do you think that this new stadium is going to be sort of reinvigorating for the people that really are loyal to baseball here?
Well, sports is a way to unify people.
Mm-hmm.
So is music, for that matter. That's the whole thing. We haven't really touched on that.
We could use more of that for sure.
We have some great venues here. Some incredible, world-class musicians in this town. Mm. And I go to Reveille in Carytown. I go to the Ember on occasion. I go to the Broadberry. Mm. And so it's just incredible to see not only regional but national acts that come through. And we're incredibly fortunate to have that at our back doorstep. And of course, then there's the amphitheater, which is so new. I think that we don't really know exactly how that's going to play out.
Seemed to have a very successful rollout.
It had a successful premiere.
Seems so.
Neil Young was there under a full moon, which you can't really complain about too much. But the
squirrels.
The squirrels. Yes, let's get back to that. Well, again, that's a quality of life issue. People who enjoy that and really enjoy it, and I think that there is certain economic benefit, but stadiums tend to be empty several months of the year. Mm-hmm. So
they hope this is going to be a year-round facility. At least that was the plan.
Right.
So I think they did think of that. I just, as something that sort of, it's not necessarily a shiny object because, frankly, the old stadium was just crumbling.
Yeah,
they really, at some point they had to, they were kind of up against it.
Some people really liked but it was designed, it was built really quickly between seasons, but it was one of the few examples of regional cooperation because the counties kicked in money to build it.
Right.
And but another thing too, just briefly, kind of aside, as part of the history of Richmond kind of thing, is that in your January Richmond Magazine, you will read about the Richmond Arena. That was actually built as an exhibition building for the Virginia State Fair when it was over there in the early part of the 20th century. And the building was constructed in 1908 and stood there for about 100 years, and then it was outdated. by the Convention and Visitors Center, the Robbins Center, the Arthur Ashe Center, on and on. But it was our full multi-use center for all that time. It was roller skating and basketball and music venues. It was a pretty incredible place. Also wrestling. It was one of the few places where professional wrestling took place before the Coliseum got built. And so that was much missed when it was torn down. But that became, on that site, became the Sportsbacker Stadium. That's where the arena was.
Well, what in your mind do you think Richmond can do better to move forward, to become a more sophisticated and developed and advanced city? What are we not doing now that we could be doing?
Well, I think we have to acknowledge what we have, first of all, and support it. Our arts and culture, which is what defines us, I think now more than ever, as a city that has something else to offer, and support that. And the Coliseum that's sitting there rotting away was too expensive to maintain, and then suddenly it's too expensive to tear down. I mean, it's there.
Right.
Fix it.
Right. Find some purpose for
use
it.
It.
Right. Yeah. I agree
Find
with
some
that.
purpose rather than
stare at it and complain.
Complain, or And I think that as the future, I think that we just need to be more cognizant of our environment. Stop, building surface parking that reflects heat. Be more aggressive about other alternative heating or alternative power, energy, and so forth. And let's be a leader in that. Let's put our marker down and say, okay, no more of this, fusty musty stuff in terms of how we approach that angle of development. Let's be smart about it. Let's make technology, our friend in terms of what we can do with it in terms to make our lives better, not just for a few people, but for everybody. It's once you start, I think it's a little less difficult to proceed. Right. But you got to start.
The energy to start is what you have to really muster.
And this applies to many of the things we've just had in this discussion.
Yeah.
It's just you just got to start. And at first, it's difficult. There's controversy. There's going to be yowlers and howlers. There are people on social media that have not been to downtown Richmond since 1972, and they're really proud of that. But they don't live here, really.
Right.
And so, let's make Richmond for the Richmonders that are here now. And let's not turn into a turnstile city either, where they just come and because they can't afford a place to live necessarily, they might live in one of those residential towers, but they look around and they mate and mingle as they will in whatever way they wish to do it, and then they want to have a family in whatever which they wish to do it, whatever way, and let's have some place for them to live. Richmond's only 60 square miles. That's all we got. That's one reason why we're going up, and that's because of the city-county split, which is a rare breed in this country. And so that comes up again, with the aspect of cooperation. Yeah. Right now we have these feudal kingdoms, duchies surrounding us, and we all have to learn to live together because we're the only ones we got.
Right.
And so there has to be some diplomacy between us all. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But this gets into very complicated issues of demographics, where people are choosing to live, financial levels, and figuring out a way to put everybody in a way that's going to be benefit.
Well, I'll end on what I hope is a high note. What would you tell somebody that is, and this is the last question though, what would you tell someone who is considering a move to Richmond, Virginia? What would you describe as? Come
on down, the water's great. We have water now. No, I mean, certainly, I say that in a joshing way, but I mean, new blood's appreciated. People from other places and bigger cities bring their own ideas, bring their concepts of what a city should be. And sometimes we won't like those ideas, but that's what the forum is for, to discuss.
And what will Richmond offer them?
Richmond offers them a place that is unlike any other place, with our museums and our art and our music and our vistas, the Capitol Trail, the James River Park system. We haven't even mentioned that. I mean, this incredible, watery Central Park that came about because a group of people put their foot down and said, "You're not going to pave this over. You're not going to tear this down." That's one of the greatest aspects of this city that didn't really need to be built. It was there, and we allowed it to exist through a great deal of effort by a number of people, and still. But now it's one of the most beloved components of who we are and what we are. So I think, we have Class 4 rapids in the middle of our town, which is, there's not you have to go to, I think, Alaska or Colorado to get, I don't have the strength or courage to go through them, but I appreciate the fact that they exist. And so it's an extraordinary town if you just take the time and pay attention, and come on a good spring day, if you don't have allergies, and just walk our streets. Look at us. We're getting there. We're getting somewhere.
We're getting there. I think that's like the tagline of the segment. We're getting there.
We're getting there.
Yes. Harry, it's been a delight having you.
It's been delightful hearing me ramble in my head.
And thank you for paying such careful attention to Richmond. We can all learn from that.
By the way, those are my books back there.
Those are his books. and
True Richmond Stories and Richmond at Ragtime, which, can I reach them from here? Anyway, you can bend them, and they can be hung in a stocking with care. There they are. There it is. And Carlisle Montgomery, which you would need a hawser and a pulley, really, and a vise to hold on a mantle, because she's pretty big. Anyway, so that's, tis the season. We're getting there.
All right.
We're getting there.
Thanks, Harry, and thanks for coming.
Absolutely.
Untold is a production of WTVR CBS 6. Executive produced by Mike Bergazzi and Catie Beck, directed by Nick Maharaj and Brock Taylor, and edited by April Harshman. Follow the show on Instagram at Untold_WTVR.